So when it comes to language development during infancy and toddlerhood, I want to talk about a few things. We'll talk about kind of some general stages of progression of language development. We'll talk about some characteristics of language development, some things that kind of are common occurrences. We'll address some milestones. We will look at child-directed speech and briefly address some of the theories surrounding language development. So language tends to progress very similarly in all languages for children that are typically developing. And so it starts with just kind of making noise on purpose. So gurgling, cooing, and then starting to turn take, right? So I make a sound, then I'm quiet, someone else makes a sound, then they're quiet, then I make a sound again. And you can notice this within the first couple months that they naturally recognize this importance of turn taking. At about 4 to 6 months, their vocalizations, and prior to this, their vocalizations include the sounds that are necessary for any language. So we call them, all the languages of the world at that point, right? But as time progresses, that will get less and less so, except for the sounds that they hear made in live language. Gestures do seem to be easier than vocalizations and can allow both babies that are hearing and deaf to communicate. And so you will hear of advocates, people advocating for baby sign language, right? Teaching them to use their bodies to communicate because they have the ability to communicate before they have the ability to speak. At about 10 months, it's kind of the stage of understanding, and I think it's important to note that at all stages they understand more than they can communicate, but that's really a period of a lot of receptive language growth. At about 12 to 13 months, you'll start hearing speech, and this begins very basic with hollow phrases, so partial words to convey thoughts. So, we would say juice, they might just say ju, and that means juice. As they get older, then that becomes more complete words. But then they still use really limited words. And by 18 months, that might become telegraphic speech, which is where they combine 2 words to communicate. So baby bye-bye could mean the baby is leaving. As I mentioned, babies use gestures before they use words. So again, advocate, there's nothing wrong with teaching them signs as well. Culture influences how language will develop, especially when it comes to what first words will be. So in English, we focus a lot on nouns, so things and people, and so often first words are nouns. But in languages such as Chinese, where the focus is verbs, it's much more likely that their first word will be a verb. So instead of doggy, it might be helping, because the focus of language is different. Vocabulary during this time period is experiencing a huge growth spurt, and as I mentioned, receptive language will always outpace expressive language. This is still the case for you or I. We could listen to someone talk about something and understand it, but not yet be able to speak the way they were speaking effectively, because we can understand more than we can produce. And children children often go through both underextensions and overextensions. So underextensions are when only one type of an object is considered that object. So like the example the book gives is the family's dog is the only thing in the whole world that can be doggy. But on the flip side, if the child recognizes that 4-legged animals that have fur are doggies, they would overextend and include horses and cats and goats and sheep and cows as doggies. So there are some common things that happen in language. So the milestones related to language development relate a lot to the stages or progression that we mentioned, but I wanted to specify that out a little bit more. So it starts with cooing and turning heads towards sounds, then it turns to babbling. So cooing tends to be what we refer to as vowel-based. So very, oohs and ahs. Babbling is more the consonant sounds, the ba, 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 na, na, those types of things. They start to make expression in their face. They cry in different ways to communicate different things. By 6 months, they're responding to sounds by making sounds, although I would say that happens earlier. Stringing vowels together, responding to their name, and may use sounds to show joy and displeasure, and brings in those jabbering consonant sounds. By 9 months, understands no, but I do want to know understanding no and being obedient to no are two completely different things. I once had a mom ask me, when will she understand what no is? And I said, about the same time that she refuses to listen to what no means. Lots of different sounds at this age, copying sounds and gestures, using fingers to point at things. By a year, responding to those simple requests, making simple gestures like shaking their head no and waving bye-bye, may use different tones that sound more like adult speech, may use words to refer to people and exclamations, tries to attempt to use the words that you use. 18 months, again, knows what those ordinary objects are, points, uses kind of physical things to communicate. You can see these overlap heavily with cognitive milestones. And by 2 years, points to things that are named, says sentences with 2 to 4 words, following simple instructions, pointing to things in a book, repeating words they overhear. So part of speech for children is what we as adults do. So you may have noticed, and you may have done it, that we tend to change the way our voice sounds when we're talking to babies. So we do things like this. We make our pitch higher, we use a sing-song voice, we make exaggerated sounds, our facial expressions change. Why in the world do adults sound so silly when they talk to babies? The answer is simple. It works. It helps get their attention. It helps them look at our face. And I want to note it's not the same thing as baby talk. We're not saying, oh, does baby want to ba-ba, right? We're actually using language, but we're just kind of creating it in a way that that they pay attention to and that they can take in. You might have also heard this called parentese. So what are some of the theories behind language development? So there's kind of two sides to this. People like Noam Chomsky believe that infants had a neural device, so something built into their brains that allowed them to develop language, and it makes them ready to learn language, and that it happens no matter what language they hear. There are others that kind of argue the other side, that children learn language because they need to communicate, and that they do so through hearing language of others. I would happen to say that I think there's a little bit of truth to both. I think our brains are wired to learn language, but we have to hear language and see a reason to use language in order for that to develop.